What a joy, guys, to be here with you today and hopefully to have a little bit of fun. I have some food models that I like to use sitting here beside me that we'll use after a bit. And I think a lot of people enjoy those rubber plastic foods that they usually joke about. So as we move on today, let me get my mouse working correctly. So the first thing we're going to review is the skills building from week number 5. And have a look at these. If you joined us last week, learning how to work your way through grief, a lot of stages there, and some resources for getting through it. So, but if we move on and get energized about nutrition today, it would be real appropriate to think about supporting our immune system with all the COVID stuff going on. And certainly just eating well supports your immune system most of the time. So we'll talk about balanced nutrition. A lot of people are confused about what that means these days, and I'm certain there will be a lot of questions that we can think about together at the end. We'll talk about frequency of eating. You know, every practitioner that you see tries to use evidence-based medicine, but of course we know from our own practice the kinds of things that we've seen work and not work, and there are a few thoughts that I have on this topic that we will think about, frequency of eating as well as the weight management. So I didn't set those up, you know, as formal objectives. I don't think we really need to for this, because this is just kind of for our own good and our own thoughts today. Hey, you guys were sitting there being all quiet, and I was watching the chat board light up with, can't hear anything. I was doing the same thing on this end. I'm going, oh my gosh, I hope my system hasn't crashed in some way that these guys aren't going to hear me. So, but we're up and rolling. So as our immune system goes, guys, there are a lot of people trying to figure out how to avoid COVID, right? And how to avoid just getting sick in general. A lot of people worried about cancer and heart disease and these kinds of things as well. And so we know there are some essential nutrients that are really important to our immune system. And I've listed them here just for our thoughts, our quick thoughts, if you will. So getting enough protein in our diet, and the amount of protein really depends on what your body goals are and what you're up to. Essential fatty acids. A lot of times clients that I see patients over in the Jameson Crane Sports Medicine. A lot of times the folks I'm seeing think that the way they're supposed to be eating is a really low fat diet. Well, you got to realize fat's a good thing in our diet. It helps with some of our hormone balance and different things like that. We don't want to be too low in fat in our diet. We want to try to hit some balance there. So vitamins, minerals, and of course fluids, as water, are all important to our immune system. And then we have some, I'll call them nutrients. They're not essential nutrients, meaning they're not required for good nutrition, but they certainly help us be healthy. And so these are the phytonutrients. These are the bright colors that we get in our fruits and vegetables. The substance that chemically gives them that color is also very good for our body. These things typically fight free radicals in our body and bring us back to good health. So phytonutrients are an important piece of this. Again, fruits, vegetables, whole grains are where we get these phytonutrients. I don't know how many of you have seen this kind of setup. This was exactly in the Kroger that I frequent. And I don't remember what I was getting there. Maybe I'd take some omega-3s. Maybe I was shopping for those, but I was in that aisle and I looked and it was like, oh my gosh, look at this. They're touting all this stuff for immune support. So, you know, you don't know when you see this, is that $18 to get that immune boost going to be worth my money? And how would you tell? Right? And so it lists for you there what one serving has in it. And, you know, I think most of us can see vitamin C, zinc, B6, D, E. We know those. Those might be familiar to us. But some people are like elderberry. I don't know about elderberry. Maybe my grandma made elderberry pie, but I don't remember much about elderberry. But there are a lot of people doing elderberry jams and honeys and all kinds of stuff these days. And then probiotics. If you haven't been exposed to probiotics these days have to do with our gut health. The bacteria in our gut do well with more probiotics. And so we know that that's kind of a rave these days for folks to be on a good probiotic, and that does help our immune system a bit. So as I move forward, I want to give you some resources. And so the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is the governing body for our whole food supply as well as our dietary supplements. Okay, and this, what you see here on the slide is a screenshot from my computer, a picture from consumerlab.com. And you can see that there are all of these different companies getting in trouble for claiming that they can prevent or cure coronavirus claim stuff. And as you see, even things like this colloidal silver seller is in on it. And I can imagine there are plenty of companies that are making immune shots at this point in time that they want you to invest in so that they can make some money on it. Whether or not these things actually work is not something that the FDA has checked, right? You're not allowed to market something if you haven't done research on it and know that it works at some level. And so I'm sure that's where these cease and desist letters are. But on this consumer lab, let me go to another slide. We have access to this for free at OSU. I've been a member of this consumerlab.com for a lot of years because of its utility for what I do. And so the link at the top is the one that I use to get to, but then I have to log on. And if it's something you want to belong to, you'll see it's a pretty powerful tool. But for right now, our library subscribes to it. And the second link is what you would click on to get to it. You probably have to go to your library panel first and make sure you're logged in off campus to the library. But then at that point, you should be able to find this exact page that we're going to visit. And so what I need to do here for a minute is jump off of this, jump over here to the supplements for the virus. And this is this exact page that I'm talking about. And you can see here that the title is Any Supplements Help with Coronavirus, and some nice graphics. But then it goes down through, and I think vitamins and minerals that can help if you're not getting enough, supplements that may possibly help reduce symptoms if you do get the virus, and then supplements and products unlikely to help, and not only unlikely to help, but the ones that could be dangerous to you. I love those categories. I don't know about you, but it's going to give us some guidance there. And so as you scroll down, we're getting this information from some science guidance, and you'll see here that folks typically have that loss of smell, right, lasting for longer than 2 weeks, and they're talking about it might be helpful to do some omega-3s, right? Vitamin D, folks who have been low in vitamin D might be at higher risk to get the virus. They also did a study where they gave folks vitamin D, and they talk about it on here. They gave them vitamin D, magnesium, and B12, right? So they're talking about whether or not that helped, but it's a pretty small study, so we're still learning about this virus. And so then they did zinc, and they talk about zinc, whether you're talking about lozenges or pills, as well as selenium. And you can just see here. So if I skip back to my slides and I say, all right, get me back to my slideshow here, and I say the micronutrients that they've talked about on there are these. Where do we get these in our regular nutrition? Remember, dietary supplements are just that. They're supposed to be a supplement to your diet. They're not supposed to be your diet. We shouldn't be living on these dietary supplements. We should be eating real whole foods to help us get these nutrients. And so as I advance, you can see that the foods that we get vitamin D out of are the fatty fish and fortified products like milk, like some of your other kinds of nut milks and that kind of stuff as well. But magnesium we get from greens, nuts, low-fat dairy, and B12 we get from animal products. If you're enjoying a vegan or a vegetarian lifestyle, you probably want to take in some things like soy milk that are fortified with B12, or almond milk, any of these, cashew milk, oat milk, any of these things that are fortified with vitamin D and B12. So then you look at zinc, and again, some of our protein foods are there. And you see that things like cottage cheese and whatnot would be high in selenium. So trying to give you a spattering there and say, look at the variety of foods that are there. I realize the zinc and vitamin D are both in some animal products, but we've got potassium that we know we get from fruits and vegetables, vitamin C that we get from fruits and vegetables, anything that grows in the sun. Okay, so whole foods again. So I know it's not sexy, but if we're going to give generalized advice about what is balanced nutrition, we should use the Choose My Plate website to do that. So I'm providing you with this resource as well. If you've not visited it for a long time, if you're thinking about doing something and trying to get your diet in a healthier space, this is a great resource to use. Okay, I know it's not sexy. I know it's like you start talking to young adults about this in the classroom and they roll their eyes like, oh my gosh, I had this in high school or junior high health class, right? And so this is the Choose My Plate website. And so again, you can go to that and see the different things. I think these portions will surprise you, and I'm going to talk about them here in a minute. Before I move on, though, I want to say that Choose My Plate website has a place where you can type in that you're female or male, how old you are, your height, your weight, and it will give you a generic calorie count for how it wants you to eat. And it will give you direct guidance for how it wants you to eat. And so it gives you these 6 grains a day, maybe 5 fats a day, 2.5 cups of vegetables, 1.5 cups of fruits. It gives you this guidance. And then you can click to learn more about each one of those things. And it shows you the actual portion size. And I call this portion size stuff the fine print. Okay, so I just want to warn you, I'm going to turn my computer. You've looked at me talk long enough, really. So I'm going to turn my computer and share my plastic foods with you. And some people are really surprised by some of these. But if you're trying to lose weight and you're going to use a tool like the Choose My Plate tool, you've got to understand what a portion size is. Okay, so I'm going to turn my computer screen a little bit, try not to make you sick. I'm in the Jameson crane. I had patients this morning. Right? So these are my plastic food models. So you shouldn't see me at this point. You should just see the foods. And so we're going to start with those grains, guys. And I love doing this because it always shocks people. And how many of you like bagels? This is a typical Lender size bagel. So Lender's brand, like you get in the freezer section, is a 4-ounce bagel. 1 ounce of any bread grain product counts as 1 grain. So this would actually count as 4 grains if you had this whole bagel for breakfast. And if you're a female, about where I am in time, we don't need to discuss all that. But the point being, I would have 6 grains on my list and I'm eating 4 of them for breakfast if I eat this. So what counts as 1 in a bagel is actually this small bagel. And I know that surprises some people. Along with bagels, let's talk about this bagel and let's go to Tim Hortons and get that bagel, because Tim Hortons is really bad about putting a lot of cream cheese on it. Now, this is actually a little thing of peanut butter, a little tablespoon of peanut butter. But if it were cream cheese and it were white, you could see that it's not nearly enough cream cheese for this bagel. Yet, if we picked up this bagel, now we've got 1 serving of fat on it and it looks adequate. I know nobody wants to eat something this small for breakfast, but just hold your horses. We're going to have some more conversation about it. But these are grains that we've talked about. So as I'm going with grains, again, my hand is a pretty typical female hand. As we look, this is about 1/3 cup of rice. And if I turn it sideways so you can see it, that is nothing like what you get when you go to a place like Mark Pies or China Express or one of those. But 1/3 cup of rice also counts as a grain. Okay, so if you're eating a cup of rice at dinner, you're getting 3 grains. Again, it depends on the individual. So the last grain that I'm going to share with you is pasta, and it shouldn't surprise you that I've got multiple little models of that. But this is 1/3 to 1/2 cup, and that's what counts as 1, okay? This is what counts as 2, it's a cup, and this is what actually counts as 4, and this is 2 cups. And so as you look, if I hold this up on an 11-inch plate and ask first, how many of you would eat this much pasta? Quite a few hands in the room go up, right? But if I put this on a plate that's a 9-inch plate, how many of you would put that much pasta on a 9-inch plate? So one of the strategies we do to try to get people to whittle these things back can be simply to change plate size. Now that looks more appropriate and I've got room for some other foods on there. If somebody's going to just fill that other plate up and then have it in other dishes, that's where our portion sizes get out of control. Okay, there are quite a few women that I see in the clinic, and they might have 3 or 4 grains for their whole day, which means that their pasta portion should be this. And we're going to fill the plate with some other things as we talk through plate structure today. All right. So if you told me that you'd eat 4 of these pasta, 1/2 cup of cooked vegetables is what counts as 1. So this would represent a cup of cooked vegetables. If I doubled this, that's 4 servings of vegetables. How many of you eat your 4 servings of vegetables in one sitting? Now, every room has a few people in it that would put their hand up and say, I do, good, that's great. But it's not typical in our environment. So next, I think I just want to jump to the protein foods and share with you that for the folks that I counsel, and I see all kinds of different people. I don't see a lot of very unique people. Usually women get 3 or 4 ounces of protein per meal. Men might get 4 or 5 ounces, but I really don't go much above 5 ounces. But this is what 3 ounces, a deck of cards, is what 3 ounces looks like. And so when you place that on your hand, you can see for me, that's right to that first crease, if you will, right? It's almost like fortune telling. So anyway, this is supposed to be salmon. We've got 3 ounces of chicken, 3 ounces of steak or a pork chop, and it's fairly thin, okay? About a 3.5 ounce burger, depending on where you're eating that burger at. So McDonald's and them certainly don't have that big of one. And then this is an 8 ounce piece of prime rib. And so I want you to imagine it's a 3 ounce for our little demonstration. And this is 2 ounces of something like turkey, like you get at the deli. And of course, I would want this to be a good quality turkey, not a lot of preservatives and whatnot, to get the premium brands. So as I'm looking at my little fat models here, this is the amount of fat, and these are just these little tubes that have grams on them. This is the amount of fat that we would see in a little bit more turkey than this. This is 2 ounces, this is the fat, and 3 ounces of turkey. If I want to take you to the hamburger, just bear with me for a minute. This is how much fat would be in a typical 80-20 hamburger. And man, don't we think prime rib is delicious, but let's imagine that this is 3 ounces. 3 ounces of this prime rib has this much fat in it, right? So you would want to trim that visible fat, even though I realize that's part of the reason some people eat it. Okay, this is what the amount of fat in a small T-bone steak. So, you know, red meat sometimes gets the slam because it's all too high in fat. You know, this is not very high in fat compared to some of those I've shown you. And then I left chicken for last because it's so entertaining. This is a piece of chicken. Let's imagine it without our skin. It's not a thigh. Let's make it a breast. It would have about this much fat in it. If I got that very same piece of chicken at a place like Cane's or KFC, now it's likely going to have this much fat in it. So an incredible amount of fat that we get in fried foods when we choose to eat those. So these fried foods got to be sometimes foods, and we'll talk about those a little bit more here in a bit. I think a lot of people then, as we're talking about fat, a lot of people would rely on something healthy, like some nuts for a snack. You know, these almonds actually count as about 4 servings of fat. 6 to 8 nuts of the size of an almond or a cashew is what counts as a serving of fat. And it's the same thing on the website when you look at the Choose My Plate website, okay? Unfortunately, this is what a serving of butter looks like. And some of you will remember what those little pats of butter look like that you used to get in places like Bob Evans. Okay, that's a serving, 1 teaspoon. This is a serving of fat and salad dressing. It's 1 tablespoon, right? And then things like cheese. This also has nice protein in it, but this is what an ounce of cheese looks like. So it's kind of like about the end of your thumb, right? This counts as a protein and a fat. So not to overdo some of these foods. And that's why I wanted to share them with you. So, and I know sometimes that's kind of a wow factor for some people. So I would be remiss not to complete this and talk about sugars a little bit. I often hear, I'm a sports dietitian, so I often hear from parents that they don't want to give their kids that sugar-loaded Gatorade or sugar-loaded, you choose whatever sports drink you want to look at. The sugar in those is functional for athletes because they need it to expend for jet fuel for their activity. But if I take a Gatorade and I spell out for you how much sugar is in a regular Gatorade, it's about this much sugar in this small bottle. This is one of those little 12-ounce bottles. Okay, if I take this apple juice, and this is Tim Hortons brand of apple juice, and it's a 10-ounce bottle, and I shake it upside down, I've placed in here the amount of sugar in that apple juice. This is part of the reason that we don't like people to just use juices all the time. They're really high in sugar. And as you can see, that parent that won't give their kid Gatorade, but they'll give them the apple juice, it's not as sugar loaded as the apple juice. Now, granted, there are other nutrients, potassium, vitamin C, those kinds of things in this apple juice. However, if I can get them to use this Gatorade and eat their fruit, we're going to land in about the same place. So last but not least, I thought I'd find something that I consider kind of fun. See how many of you like the pumpkin spice season at Starbucks. I know a lot of folks wait on that to come in. So pumpkin spice Frappuccino, I've got online and I've looked up their tall, non-fat. I use a non-fat milk in just a tall size. It tells me that it would have 45 grams of sugar in it. I want to teach you today that anytime you're eating something that has added sugar, You take the grams of sugar on the label. So 45 grams is what the label says on Starbucks. And you divide that by 4. That's how many teaspoons of sugar are actually in that. And so I've got my handy dandy little teaspoon out, and I've got my sugar bowl and a demonstration bowl for you. And if there's 45 grams, that means there's 11 teaspoons, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hope you're laughing with me. 6, 7. What's my point? 8, 9, 10. That's how much sugar is in that thing, right? It is definitely a sometimes food. By the way, the little demonstration I just gave you with these food models, even though they roll their eyes at you, it still goes over pretty good with teenagers because they come to realize how much sugar's in stuff. I know I did have in my model set that I plan to talk about one of those peach teas as well. Looking at the sugar that's in stuff like that is crazy. So I am a Starbucks fan. I happen to see on the chat board somebody go, oh, avoid Starbucks. You know, I drink decaf coffee because I love the taste of coffee, and I put a little skim milk in it, and I kid all the time. That's how I'm getting my dairy. Okay, it doesn't have a bunch of added sugar in it at all. So, okay, let's move on with the slides then. Let me get my mouse to the right place again.
You'll need to share your screen again.
Oh, good gracious. I'm glad that you said that. Thank you. I didn't realize that was going to be the case.
It was just so people could more easily see the video of you sharing all your wonderful play food.
Oh, there you go. Well, thank you. So for whatever reason, my mouse is not working again, just like it did to us earlier. So David, if you don't mind, go get on the fine print slide.
All right, Jackie, I'm going to help you out here. So let me find them.
Gonna have to, because my mouse went away again, just like it did earlier.
Oh, it's okay. All right, let me share the screen. Sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, we are.
This is what happens when they've got lots of things going.
If I could get my mouse to happen to slide over top of the share.
Okay. All right, so we're going to share this one. Is that working? And then...
Yeah, and then just start it up again. And so that was us on slide 10 there talking about the fine print. So let's go ahead and advance the slide.
Oh, what?
So,
okay.
You okay?
Yeah. Right.
So this conversation really that I've been having with you is around nutrient density, trying to get you to think about eating whole foods that aren't just loaded with sugar and fat. Fat's important, but we don't want to have too much of it in our diet. It makes losing weight or maintaining your weight impossible to put too much of it on your body. So when we look at nutrient density, it refers to eating foods that have like a lot of nutrients for their calories is what it comes down to. So things like fruits and vegetables are awesome for the calories that are in them. You get a fair amount of nutrition in those. And for this, I always categorize as sometimes foods and all the times foods. I shouldn't say always because that's not a good rule either, is it? But I remember when my kids were growing up, we had a bowl of fruit that was out all the time. That was the all the time foods. We talked about regularly snacks. My little one had a sweet tooth and she would always go to the snack drawer and want something sweet. Well, how many of those sometimes foods have you had today? And she would know what that meant and go get herself something that was more nutritious. Now, it's hard to handle children. It's a crapshoot. You never know if you're doing the right thing or not. But every kiddo of age 4, 5 and on up gets the sometimes foods, all the times foods. You guys get it. You know, if I held up a piece of pizza and the pizza is maybe pepperoni pizza with cheese and you can see a little bit of grease on it. And I said, is this a sometimes food or an all the time food? My guess is most of you would be like, it's a sometimes food. If I had that same piece of pizza, maybe it's not quite as big, but it's just loaded with vegetables. And you're right, looking at that going, wow, I don't know if that's a sometimes or an all the time food. Yeah, it can be an all the time food, but you needed to make the choice to put those vegetables on it. Okay. So calorie density is kind of different than nutrient density, because calorie density means that you have too many calories in that food to get as much nutrition as you would need to get for the calories you need for the day. And I just really think that people that eat a lot of calorie dense foods like cookies and ice cream and stuff like that, your sweet tooth begins to kind of crave those foods, right? And so when you're trying to manage your weight, we want to be careful about eating many calorie dense foods. They fit in our diet. I'm not saying we can't have them, but they're not an all the time food. And we need to make sure that we kind of keep them in their place. Advance that. I'll start going ding.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
So what do we see all the time? I looked and looked online trying to find a picture of folks in a country that has a high level of starvation, so that I could have and show you guys this picture that I have in my mind all the time. And I often describe this to clients. So when I was a kid growing up, we saw on the cover of oh my gosh, the Natural magazine that we see all the time. Anyway, so it's a country in Africa, and these little kids are in the foreground, and they've got these skinny little arms and skinny little legs on National Geographic, okay? And their little pot bellies are there. That means those kids are in pure starvation, okay? And that's probably what the article is going to be about. There are some women in that picture, and their robes, their gowns are very loose on them. They're very thin and gaunt looking. And then there are some women who are really heavy. And I always say, do you think those heavy women are eating all the food? There is not a mother alive that would eat all the food instead of giving it to her child, right? Or instead of sharing it with others. And so what I want you to realize is some people's response to starvation is for their body to hoard body fat. And especially if their pattern of eating is not regular. And so what I see all the time are women who are overweight to the point of being obese. They want to lose weight. And they come in and they're upset because they have been trying really hard. They have something small for breakfast. They avoid the donuts that somebody brings into the office, not right now in these days, but you with me. At lunch, they have some kind of salad. They even skip out on the salad dressing. In the afternoon, they're pretty hungry, but they hold off until they get home. And once they hit the kitchen at home, all bets are off. They're so hungry that there's some pretzels on the counter. They're going to eat them. They're going to have a little bit of dip with them. They're going to have some iced tea. They're going to, there's all kinds of stuff that they end up having. Maybe that iced tea has sugar in it and whatnot. Because they're so doggone hungry, their brain's going, eat, eat, eat. And that's all they can think about. Maybe there's a couple brownies from last night. They eat a couple of those. Now they're fixing dinner. They get dinner fixed and they need to sit down with the family and eat. So they sit down and eat another meal. Let me act like your metabolism in that. Guys, with breakfast. Guys, don't know if it's going to be a very good day. There's not much food coming in, right? It gets to lunchtime and it's like, slow down. We're getting salad again. We're not going to have the energy to make it through the day, right? You get to dinner time and what's it do? It's woohoo, have a party, but put some of it away because we don't know what she's going to give us tomorrow. And I hate to use gender specificity like that, but it's classically women that I talk to that are doing this. Sometimes guys do too. They just don't know what else to do with their diet, right? How else can I try to lose weight? I try to impress on them, eat earlier in the day, eat more earlier in the day and a little less later in the day. Snack throughout the day so it keeps your metabolism and your blood sugars, all of that stuff kind of steady throughout the day. Okay, so I would have a picture here and I would maintain to you guys, propose to you guys that people that don't eat enough stay really heavy. And then when they do refeed again, what happens? They gain even more weight. People get disgusted with themselves, so they decide to go on a diet and they might be successful for a while. They lose some weight, but as soon as they start refeeding, they gain a bunch of back of that weight because of their metabolism, right? So we try to get people to be on somewhat of a normal calorie diet without being overboard. Let's go ahead and advance that slide. Okay, so I don't want people eating a small number of calories. It leads to under eating early in the day and then having too much later in the day. This is the same conversation I was just having to you. Because our metabolic rates are so variable between people, it is hard to find evidence of this for each person, but it's time we start treating each individual like an individual. What works for one person is not going to work for another person. And there are a lot of variations of different kinds of dieting behaviors out there these days. The recommendations, the national food recommendations, the last time they came out in 2015, talked about to have a healthful, varied diet. So for your weight management, let's discuss that for a few minutes. It all fits together here. You got to get up and move. You cannot sit down at your desk at home, wherever you're working at home, if you are, and sit there all day. You've got to get up and move. If you've got some kind of a tracker, like a watch or something like that, set your goals for it and make sure you do that during the day. I know my steps on days when I'm working and doing this kind of stuff are not nearly what they are on the weekends when I can get outside and do yard work and do farm work. So get enough of the essential nutrients using that plate method that we talked about. Yeah, I showed you the Choose My Plate. The other thing that I like to use is from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And this is a book that you get if you end up coming to see me and talk about your nutrition. But we try to personalize a plan for you. And this book does the same thing. It shows you how much counts as a serving, and they match exactly what's on, for the most part, what's on the Choose My Plate site. So get your portions right. Make sure you're getting enough protein. The meal that we as typical eating Americans don't get enough protein at is breakfast. So I want you to have some protein at breakfast, and eggs are okay. Don't spit at them, okay? So, and then frequency of eating, we've already probably talked about enough. So here's an example day of how I would help somebody think about eating. Half a cup of cooked oats, 3/4 cup of blueberries, 6 ounces of Greek yogurt, a boiled egg, and a tablespoon of chopped nuts. If you're sitting there saying to yourself, oh my goodness, that is a lot of food, then I want you to wear the conversation we were having earlier. You've got to eat enough food for your body to be healthy. And if your weight management is screwed up because you have gone up and down a lot in your weight, the only way to get this straightened out is to fuel your body with enough food. And there's an amount that's right for you. I know I have people that say I can gain weight on 1,000 calories. And it's like, well, when you start talking about their history, they've lost and gained weight so many times, it's just not funny. So we got to work our way out of that. But to do that, you need to think about treating your body this way. And so at lunch, at least having something like a sandwich, if you're a low carber and you don't want to do the sandwich, at least get some protein and some veggies in there, some healthy fats in there. Even a ketogenic diet, if it's what your eating pattern is, doesn't mean low calories. You've still got to fuel yourself close enough that your body believes it's not in starvation. Okay, so then hitting you at dinner time with very little carb and having more bright colors in terms of your veggies, and then filling in the gaps, having snacks of these kinds of foods. Of course, an occasional cookie fits in there, but that doesn't mean that we eat cookies all day and as long as we have them in the house. Okay, so here's my slide for you guys for skills building for week number 6. Eating regular meals with a good food variety helps us stay healthy. We're going to think about sometimes foods and all the times foods. All the times foods are just that. Eat those. They're best for us. They're more nutrient dense. And of course, portion control. We talked about portion control. I hope that was entertaining for you. But I also hope you take some of it to heart, because it's what's wrong with us in our society. We've got to get our eating under control, right? Eat your colors, eat your fruits and vegetables, and losing weight doesn't mean that you need to starve yourself.
So the first question that we have was kind of in relation to a session we had a couple weeks ago, and maybe you can't speak directly to intermittent fasting, but maybe if you have any advice on the type of intermittent fasting diet, any information or anything you'd like to share on that type of diet.
Sure. We get this question a lot, and I'm fine getting the question. The short answer is we just haven't seen enough research on it yet in large groups of people to better understand if there's a good physiological reason to do it. I will say that any sort of diet that a person's going to adopt, if it helps them cut their calories back to the reasonable space it needs to be in, then it's likely going to help them a little bit. The one thing about the intermittent fasting is that there are like 4 or 5 different ways that you can be in intermittent fasting. Just be sure you're doing your best to cover your bases in terms of the nutrients your body needs. Obviously, from the conversation that we've had, I prefer people eat across the day and in smaller amounts. But for some people, intermittent fasting probably works just fine.
So someone mentioned a protein calculator, we're discussing it in the chat a little bit, and said it gave 3 recommendations for daily grains, three recommendations or number of daily grams, one from American Dietetic Association for the highest amount, the CDC, and WHO, the safe lower limit. Which institution's recommendations would you go by?
Nice little tools that they have there. I think we should be cautious about how we apply things like that and the information we find. For instance, it says near the bottom of the page that a slice of bread has 8 grams of protein in it. That must be some kind of protein bread, because most slices of bread do not have 8 grams of protein in them, 3 at most, for a typical 1 ounce slice of bread. Anyway, I like to use 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilogram. And if you read, that's what the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetic should be. So for instance, what they call the American Dietetics Association was renamed a number of years ago to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So anyway, the current sports nutrition recommendations have you around 1.7 grams per kilogram. If you want to do your own calculation, take your pounds of body weight, divide that by 2.2, then multiply it by 1.7. And that's the ballpark I try to get people in. But the people I work with, I assume that in losing weight, they don't want to lose lean mass. And I think that's important as we age. So that's why I take that higher protein road, if you will. The other numbers are what keeps people out of deficiency. And there's a big difference between optimal and deficiency. So I like to go a little bit higher in that. I typically will then have it be a little bit lower in carb. It's just my preference for working with people. If somebody is a Revan athlete that really needs the carb, then of course they get the carb, but they usually have the calories that they can afford that.
What is a good breakfast for someone who is gluten-free?
Oh, just rely on all your gluten-free foods. Sorry to react that way, but things like Van waffles, and there are all kinds of brands that you can buy that are gluten-free. Any of the potato products. In fact, I think if I read through these questions, somebody responded and said they use sweet potatoes. You can use any kind of carb that's not wheat-based or that does not have gluten in it for your breakfast. So, you can even put some little potato chunks in your eggs if you want that for your carb. Using something like a sweet potato is an excellent idea because it's so nutrient dense. Same thing for things like acorn, squash, and stuff like that. You can pre-cook, prepare, if you will, any of that stuff and have it in your fridge.
Okay, changing gears a little bit. The next question is, how do the portions change with regular women versus a pregnant woman?
And so, pregnant women get their own category. If you go to that Choose My Plate website, you choose that you're a pregnant woman, and it resets everything to be compatible with a pregnant woman. In the first trimester, to be more direct about that question, in the first trimester, there's not a huge difference in how much more a woman needs, maybe another 100 or so calories, but that goes up with each trimester. And so, by the time you're at the end of your pregnancy, you might be at another 400 or 500, depending on how your weight is doing. So work with your healthcare practitioner on that. But we talk about the RDAs for nutrients in life stages, and pregnancy as well as lactation both have their own life stage category. So a lot of these tools that we're talking about allow you to choose pregnant, and it helps you see your different needs.
Okay. This question is more about the type of diets that we hear about in the media. So I often get confused because it seems like one week fat is the enemy, the next week carbs are the enemy. Can you comment on whether something like keto is a healthy diet?
Sure. So, things like keto are not my first go-to for a patient. I would love a patient to be on a normal, varied diet where we've got all the food groups included. Having said that, we're all individuals, and what works for one person may not work for the next person. And I typically look at a person's risk by their body build for insulin resistance. And people that carry all of their weight and extra fat in their midsection are at a higher risk for diabetes and heart disease compared to people who have more of the pear shape, if you will. And in my experience, the kind of person that the ketogenic diet might be like a second or third aim target for is somebody that's got that thick midsection or the apple build, if you will, some insulin resistance in there. And it is crazy how that works for certain individuals. Now, having said that, if you think you're going to keto and be on it for 8 months and lose all your weight, then go back to normal eating, you're going to poon right back up. You've got to find your level of carbohydrate tolerance in there. I don't want people to be on ketogenic for long term. That's just where I as a practitioner am at. But I also know there are other practitioners on campus who would put you on ketogenic and not worry about it. They themselves eat ketogenic and don't worry about it. It is next to miraculous for some people, but it is not for everybody. And we've got to start thinking about ourselves as an individual and trying to get our diet where we seem to do best with it. So carb is not the enemy for everybody. Fat is not the enemy for everybody. In fact, let me comment on fat because I don't think we know the full fat story yet. I think we're coming closer to realizing that fats are not solely the issue, that carbs are part of the issue. Places like Sweden back in 2013 dropped their fat guidelines because they were realizing this. So eat the fats, but what I try to tell people, anytime you're adding fat to your diet, add something that's high in monounsaturated. That's the one that we're not very good at. So those are things like the nuts, the avocados, the olive oils, and those kinds of things. I'm not saying overeat them. I'm saying use them in your diet. They're part of a healthy diet.
Next question, I believe, happens when you were talking a little bit about portion control and kind of maybe showing some of the play foods that you had. Besides water, what kinds of foods or snacks can we overdo?
Oh, the ones, yeah. Meaning, I will take that question to mean which ones can we have as much as we want of?
I think so.
Yeah, vegetables, green vegetables, anything from the watery vegetable list. Remember, things like corn, peas, winter squashes, potatoes are not vegetables. They are starches. So the non-starchy vegetables, have at it. You know, it's like 25 calories a serving, have at it. They are so nutrient dense, they're very good for us.
Our next question says, I have noticed I'm spending more of my budget on food lately, especially protein. I have myself and 3 teens. My go-to protein are eggs. Are there any other good, inexpensive proteins or foods that you recommend?
So without a doubt, right now, the bottom has fallen out of eggs. I mean, you can get a dozen eggs for less than $1 at times, and that's 12 little portions in there. So great go-to. Boil some of those, keep them peeled, have them in the fridge. Hope that your teens lean towards those at time too. Things like mozzarella cheese sticks. You can get those at a pretty decent price. That's a nice little snippet of protein. Each one of those should have about 6 or 8 grams of protein in it. Some of the Greek yogurts that you buy that are plain, you can have that in your fridge and teach them about using berries and granola in it. That'd be a nice little snippet of protein for them. I know they're not all cheap, if you will. Maybe for less expensive, maybe we look at things like using black beans mixed with ground turkey for some quick tacos or something like that. I know, again, the ground turkey is not cheap. The hamburger that we buy that is cheap is fairly loaded with fat. So figure out what meat you like, and maybe it's something like chicken, where you get chicken thighs or something like that, and do them in one of these rice cooker kinds of Instapots, I guess we call them. And mix those with beans. Things like beans are nutrient dense, really good for us if a person tolerates carb well. The other thing I've seen people do that have teenagers in the house where they're trying to get some snippets of protein for a reasonable cost is to bake with it. So to make some protein bran muffins, where you're using powdered protein to mix in there. And you got to play with your recipe a little bit and try to get it right. Again, not necessarily cheap, if you will, but maybe more convenient in terms of trying to get that in.
All right. The next question is, can you address high fructose corn syrup? Why is it so bad, and how bad is it compared to sugar?
Yeah, so great question. Two schools of thought on that. One school of thought is that high fructose corn syrup is no different than any other sugar, and that our body just recognizes it as another sugar. The more and more time goes on, the more and more I personally believe that the other camp might have something, and the other camp is saying that high fructose corn syrup is more readily turned into fat at the liver level in our body. If you look at our body fat patterns over time, I know we've eaten a lot of things differently, but high fructose corn syrup seems to be one of those things that gets pointed out. So is high fructose corn syrup responsible for some of our abdominal adiposity? That's a good question. That's a challenging question. Nonetheless, the reason companies use high fructose corn syrup is because it's a cheap source for them to be able to get the sweetener in there. If you can afford it and you want to avoid it a little bit, it's probably not a terrible idea, but you shouldn't be overdoing sugar in your diet anyway. So you got to be careful about eating a lot of things with high fructose corn syrup in them. If we get away from the processed foods, we don't have that issue.
Kind of on the same lines as high fructose corn syrup, what's your take on artificial sweeteners?
Well, I don't think artificial sweeteners should be a staple in our diet. I don't know how to put that. I don't want us to overdo them in our diet. You get an awful lot of people that drink a 6-pack or a 12-pack of diet soda a day. That's not moderation. It's not balance. So I guess I'd like to see people not over-rely on them. They're chemically structured things that aren't natural in our food supply. There are some people that believe they're the devil. I don't think they're the devil, but I also don't want us to overdo them. Everything in moderation is my take on that. I will say there are some nice studies showing that once that sweet taste hits our tongue, that it actually starts to prep the system with insulin and whatnot. So I think be careful if you're a person who's diabetic, thinking that you're doing yourself a favor by using all those artificial sweeteners. And I know that's sometimes how people behave. You'd be better off to use some kind of a natural, maybe like a crushed up watermelon or something like that in that water. Use something that gives it that little sweet taste that you desire without it being unnatural.
Okay, we've got a couple more. Are there advantages for being dairy-free if you're not lactose intolerant?
So again, these guys know all the buttons to push because these are all the hot topics, right? So numerous camps on dairy products. I subscribe to the camp that dairy is a good food. It's nutrient dense. It's a good food for us to use in our diet. Even if you're lactose intolerant, you can typically get your stomach enzymes, your intestinal enzymes, lactase, to upregulate a little bit by giving it small exposures to lactose. So you can get yourself ramped up a little bit is the theory there. Now, for all the folks who say no other animal drinks milk in its adult life, if you left a cow and a calf together forever, she would produce milk for a long time and that calf would try to nurse her. Right? That's not how we handle it in farming. We separate them because we want to milk the cow and sell the milk. So I'm just saying, I think this idea of weaning is where that comes from. So I know that's a really weird answer, but I'm a farm girl. So that's what my answer is. So for the people who are afraid of the hormones, all animals have hormones. If hormones have been added, then and you want that out, then of course. But I don't see any great advantages. I understand some of the camps. One of the camps I don't understand is, but what about all the pus? Pus and milk? What? milk is tested something like 17 times from the time it leaves the cow and gets to our table. And if a farmer has had a cow in there that's on antibiotics and they screen for the antibiotics and they find that, the milk all gets tossed and he gets fined. So farmers aren't intentionally doing that. I don't think our food supply is inundated with that. I know this is a really long answer, but that's one of those hot buttons. Some people believe that milk's inflammatory as an inflammatory food as well. I do not subscribe to that. I think eat your fruits and vegetables as anti-inflammatories.
All right. The next one's kind of a loaded question, so
I think you hit a couple loaded questions already. Go ahead.
Does the sugar in fruits count the same towards daily sugar intake limits? Does the sugar in fruit convert to fat the same as other bad sugars? Are there fruits that are better or worse than others considering the amount of sugar they contain? And if I need to repeat any parts of that, I will.
No, it's okay. I mean, I'm going to stand by the fruits are such a healthy food for us because of their nutrient density and the anti-inflammatory properties. I know, we had a couple of comments about elderberry and stuff like that. The phytonutrients in these fruits are so worth our time to consume. You're going to consume carbohydrate if you're eating a normal mixed diet. Don't worry about that natural sugar in real fruit. Now, I'm not saying drink it in juice. That's pretty concentrated, right? But get the fiber, get all the nutrients from that fruit. Don't worry about that. I'd rather see people eat fruit than eating a lot of bread. So if you're going to make sacrifices for the carb piece, I do not believe that we need to worry about the sugar in fruit. So I guess I am going to have you read pieces of that back to me if I haven't addressed all of it. Yeah, I'd be careful about labeling sugars as bad when they're in whole foods. So for instance, I also wouldn't say that the lactose in dairy or, in yogurt is bad. What I would say is bad is eating the different yogurts that have the fruit on the bottom. And it's not fruit on the bottom, that's syrup on the bottom, right? So staying away from those is where I'd rather see the focus. But, there are natural carbohydrates, including sugars, in the foods that we eat. Eat nutrient-dense foods.
All right. Again, I think this goes back to kind of the portion control place where we were. How often can you eat a sometimes food?
That's a funny question. I'm with you, though. My limit for my kiddo that had the sweet tooth is she'd had 2 that day, then she needed to find something healthier to eat. But that's not anybody's guideline besides me as a parent going, come on, dude, you can make better choices than that. And if you were a patient sitting in front of me, we'd have the same joke. I'd be like, come on, dude, are you sugar addicted? We have a fair number of people in our society who just really crave sugar. My thought for them and what I try to do with them is get the protein in their diet up a little bit and throughout the day enough to keep them from getting so hungry and craving, right? But yeah, let's back up and make some good food choices. That's where I'm at with that.
Okay. Looks like we have 2 more. Any recommendations for helping a picky eater who's a teenager become better at eating whole foods? Even willingness to try some would be great.
Yeah. So, but this probably needs to start when your kids are quite a bit younger. Have it a 1 bite rule. So there are different estimates out there, but one of them is a kiddo, a young person, or anybody for that matter, has to try a new food something like 15 to 17 times before they might adapt to the taste. Some people are super tasters. This is actually a thing. They have a much more acute sense of taste than other people. So eating vegetables is hard for them, but figuring out how to fix those vegetables in another way that is compatible is good. I know we always had the 1 bite rule, and I didn't even care if my kids got up and spit it out, but it needs to go on your taste buds and give it a shot. right? And they knew that was expected and that was going to happen. But one of the things that I usually say to teenagers when they're in the clinic working with me is, have you thought about down the road, if you happen to have kids, how you're going to feel about a picky eater? Try to get them to like self-evaluate that a little bit if you can, is how I try to handle it, hoping that they'll say, you know what, I probably do need to think a little more about trying different stuff. Who knows what works? You're always looking for the magic bullet for each person.
All right. And our last question should be a fairly easy one. I eat almonds for a mid-morning snack. What else would you recommend given the high fat content?
Yeah. Nothing wrong with your almonds. Go ahead and have 6, 8, 10. I'm not into counting almonds, but the point being a very small portion. Have something maybe like a mozzarella cheese stick. Maybe have some cottage cheese with some blueberries and slice those almonds up on it. Things like that, I think, are awesome snacks. But you don't have to give up the nuts. You just need to spread them out across the day a little bit. You could have 6 or 8 nuts in the morning for your snack and 6 or 8 in the afternoon for your snack, but then put another little piece of protein with it. I'm glad that my brain went there because I want to remember to say people are under the impression that nuts are an awesome protein source. They do have protein in them. That's not wrong, but it's not a lot. It's not concentrated. If you look that up on any food calculator, you're going to see that you either got to overeat fat to get enough protein, or you got to just have just a few so that you're not overeating fat, and then put another protein with it. Please know that our Ohio State health insurance, our prime care insurance, provides you with 3 visits per year for each person on your plan to see a dietitian at Ohio State. They're trying to help us get healthier, but a lot of people don't know about that benefit. I know, I see athletes, I see people who are being physically active and trying to lose weight over at the Jamison Crane Sports Medicine Institute. I know we have numerous outpatient dietitians that work in different of our outpatient care settings. So if you want to see a dietitian, call and get on the schedule. Your insurance is going to help you with it. I also have the ability in my lab, in my clinic, to test body composition using an IDEXA. So if you want to learn more about that, Google it at OSU and you'll see some opportunities for that as well. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you. It's been awesome.